The morning light spilled softly through the kitchen window, turning the marble counter into a mirror of gold. Clara Rivers stood at the stove, stirring a pan of eggs as the smell of roasted coffee filled the house. From upstairs, she could already hear Ethan moving, precise, deliberate footsteps that matched his carefully ordered life. "Morning, darling," he said, descending the stairs with that familiar half-smile. His voice carried both warmth and ownership. Clara smiled back, a reflex honed by years of practice. She placed his mug before him, perfectly timed, just the way he liked it. 1 spoon of sugar, no cream. He scanned the table, eyes landing on the eggs. "You used the low-fat butter this time?" She nodded quickly. "Yes. You said the regular one was too oily last week." "Good," he replied, sipping his coffee. "You're learning." The words brushed against her skin like frost. She hid the sting behind another smile. Outside, a neighbor waved through the window, Mrs. Turner from across the street. Clara waved back. To the world, they were the picture of harmony. The handsome engineer husband, the graceful wife who volunteered at the library. Their home gleamed with fresh paint and manicured hedges, a postcard of perfection. But behind the freshly painted walls, silence had its own language. Later that morning, Clara stood in front of the bathroom mirror, adjusting her pearl earrings. Ethan appeared behind her, straightening his tie. Their reflection looked flawless, 2 polished faces, 1 invisible fracture. "You're coming to the firm's dinner tonight," he said, not asking. "I thought I might stay home," she murmured. "I've been feeling—" His hand landed gently on her shoulder, a gesture that might have seemed loving to anyone watching. "You'll come," he said softly, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "It's important people see us together. We're a team, remember?" She nodded, lowering her gaze. "Of course." He kissed her cheek and walked out, humming. The sound faded as the door closed. Clara's reflection remained, frozen and hollow. She whispered to it, "We're a team," but her voice trembled on the last word. Throughout the day, she moved through familiar motions, laundry, errands, grocery lists, but her thoughts drifted to a time when Ethan's laughter filled their home instead of his criticism. Back then, she'd fallen for his confidence, his ambition, his promise of safety. She hadn't noticed how easily charm can twist into control. By evening, she stood beside him at the dinner party, surrounded by his colleagues. Ethan's arm rested lightly around her waist, but his grip tightened whenever she spoke too freely. When she mentioned wanting to return to work, his fingers pressed harder. "Clara's just joking," he told the group, laughing. "She knows I'd miss her too much." Everyone laughed with him. Clara smiled on cue, her glass trembling in her hand. Later, when they returned home, Ethan praised her for behaving perfectly. He handed her a small gift box, a silver bracelet. "For my perfect wife," he said. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words felt heavy. The bracelet glimmered in the light, delicate and cold. She slid it onto her wrist and felt its weight settle, like a promise she could never escape. That night, as Ethan slept beside her, Clara stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between his breaths. She thought of the neighbors who called them the perfect couple, of the dinner guests who envied their love, of how easily appearances can smother truth. She turned to her side, eyes tracing the bracelet's faint reflection. It caught the moonlight like a shackle. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she'd start writing again. Not stories, but thoughts. Small pieces of herself she refused to lose. Words no one could ache. Outside, the town slept in peace. Inside the Rivers' home, perfection exhaled quietly, just before it began to crack. The morning after the dinner party, Clara woke to the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing beside her. The silver bracelet still circled her wrist, faintly warm from her skin. She turned it slowly, tracing the inscription etched inside, "Forever yours." The words no longer sounded like love. They sounded like a warning. Downstairs, Ethan was already on his laptop. "You were wonderful last night," he said without looking up. "Everyone said how lucky I am." She poured herself a cup of coffee. "They were kind." He smiled thinly. "Just remember, appearances matter. People notice when wives act distracted." His tone was calm, but his eyes flicked toward her phone on the counter. "You've been texting someone lately?" Clara froze. "Just Mara. She asked about. I thought we agreed she was a bad influence." His voice sharpened, then softened again, the way a blade glints before it's sheathed. "I only want what's best for you, Clara. You know that." She nodded, swallowing the tremor in her throat. "Of course." For the rest of the morning, Ethan worked in his study while Clara pretended to tidy the living room. Every sound in the house seemed magnified: the creak of the floorboards, the steady tick of the clock, the faint buzz of his phone receiving messages she would never read. She felt like a guest in her own home. When he finally left for work, she sat at the kitchen table and opened a small notebook she'd hidden inside a cookbook. Its first page was blank except for the date. Her handwriting trembled as she began, "He says he loves me, but love shouldn't feel like disappearing." She wrote until her hand ached. Tiny entries of fear, fragments of memory she needed to preserve before she forgot what was real. The journal became her secret companion, the only place where truth could breathe. That evening, Ethan came home early. "Why didn't you answer when I called?" "I didn't hear it," she said too quickly. He reached for her phone and scrolled through her call history. His expression stayed calm, almost kind. "You have to be more careful. People might get the wrong idea if you ignore your husband." She tried to smile. "You worry too much." "Because I love you," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, soft and cold. "Everything I do is for us." Later that night, Clara sat by the window, watching the neighborhood lights flicker out one by one. She remembered her mother's words from years ago. Love should make you bigger, not smaller. Yet, every day, she felt herself shrinking, folding inward, fading quietly beneath Ethan's shadow. When she reached for the journal again, she hesitated. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves could hear. She waited until Ethan's breathing deepened, then wrote in the dark by the faint glow of her phone. "He watches me, even when he's not looking." In the following weeks, Ethan's control grew tighter. He installed security cameras outside for safety, but one pointed directly at the kitchen window. He started handling their finances entirely, reminding her that numbers only confuse you, darling. When friends called, he answered first, telling them Clara was resting. Each act came wrapped in affection. "You don't need anyone else," he'd say, kissing her forehead. "You have me." Her smiles became quieter, smaller, practiced. The neighbors still waved from their lawns, still admired how devoted Ethan was. And Clara, with her gentle voice and steady grace, played her role perfectly. Until one evening, while cleaning, she found an envelope hidden in the study drawer, an invoice for a GPS tracker purchased months ago. Her stomach turned cold. She realized Ethan hadn't just been watching her, he'd been following her, even when she thought she was free. That night, she didn't write in her journal. She tore out the last page and flushed it down the toilet, terrified he'd find it. But the words she'd already written lived inside her now, whispering for her to run. As she lay awake beside him, staring into the dark, she wondered how long someone could live pretending not to see their own cage. Outside, a storm gathered in the distance, silent for now. waiting to break. The storm that had hovered over the town finally broke that Friday morning, rain streaking the windows like tear tracks. Clara sat at the kitchen counter, tracing circles on the mug Ethan had left behind. He'd rushed out early, muttering about a meeting across town. The house, usually heavy with his presence, felt strangely light. She glanced at her phone. An unread message blinked from an unfamiliar number. Still in town. Would love to see you. Mara Benson, her childhood friend, now a practicing therapist. It had been nearly 5 years since they'd last spoken. For a moment, Clara's finger hovered over the delete button. Then she typed back, "Coffee sounds nice. Tomorrow?" When she arrived at the small cafe the next morning, the bell over the door chimed softly. Mara looked up from her seat by the window and smiled, warm, genuine, untouched by suspicion. "Clara Rivers," she said, standing to hug her. "You look exactly the same." Clara laughed, though it came out brittle. "You're too kind." They talked about safe things at first, childhood memories, neighbors they once knew, the kind of surface nostalgia that kept real emotion at bay. But Mara's eyes, trained and patient, saw beyond the practiced smile. "So," she asked gently, "how's married life?" Clara stirred her tea, watching the swirl of cream dissolve. "Good," she said too quickly. "Busy. Ethan's doing well at work. He's wonderful." Mara tilted her head. "You don't have to sell the word." Clara's hand froze mid-stir. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The sound of rain tapping the glass filled the silence. "Fina," Ellie, Clara forced a laugh. "I'm fine, Mara. Really. I just miss this talking." Mara smiled, but her tone softened. "Sometimes people say they're fine when they're not." Clara looked up, eyes glossy. "And sometimes people really are." For the rest of the meeting, they avoided the subject. But when Clara left, she felt something new in her chest, a quiet, pulsing warmth. For the first time in years, she'd spoken freely, even if only in half-truths. That night, Ethan noticed. "You're glowing," he said, scanning her face. "Where were you?" "Just coffee with an old friend." His brow furrowed. "Who?" "Mara Benson. She moved back here." Ethan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You should have told me. I like knowing where you are." "I didn't think it mattered," she said softly. "Of course it matters," he replied, brushing her hair from her face. "I just worry about you." He kissed her cheek, then walked away. She stood still, realizing she was holding her breath. Over the next few weeks, she met Mara again, always in daylight, always briefly. Their coffee talks became Clara's lifeline. She began to speak more openly, describing the little things Ethan did, his watchfulness, his temper, the way he corrected her in public. Mara listened, patient and steady. "Clara," she said one afternoon, "that's not love. That's control." Clara shook her head. "He's just protective." "Has he ever hurt you?" "Not physically." Mara's silence said what words couldn't. Clara glanced at her watch, panic flickering across her face. "I have to go. He'll wonder where I am." Mara reached across the table, touching her hand. "If you ever feel unsafe, call me. Promise me." Clara hesitated, then nodded. "I'm fine," she whispered, the lie trembling between them. When she got home, Ethan was waiting in the driveway. His expression vayu. That night, as she lay in bed, Clara replayed Mara's words. "That's not love." They echoed in the darkness like a secret she wasn't ready to face. She turned her head toward the open window. The rain had stopped, but the world outside still smelled of thunder. Somewhere in that lingering quiet, she knew the storm hadn't really passed. It was only gathering strength. The following week crawled by with uneasy quiet. Ethan's mood had shifted, too polite, too still. He no longer commented on Clara's outfits or checked her messages in front of her. Instead, he watched her quietly, as if waiting for something. Each smile, each kiss goodnight, felt rehearsed. One evening, Clara came home late from volunteering at the library. The house was dark except for the lamp in the living room. Ethan sat on the couch, phone in hand, his face unreadable. "You didn't pick up," he said softly. "I was shelving books. My phone was on silent." He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "You were with her again, weren't you?" "Her? Mara." The way he said the name made it sound like a crime. "You lied to me." Clara's stomach knotted. "Ethan, she's my friend. We just had coffee." He stood abruptly, the phone clattering onto the table. "You think I'm stupid?" His voice rose, echoing off the walls. "You sneak around, whisper about me behind my back, then come home acting innocent?" She stepped back. "You're twisting things. You always do." His laugh was cold. "Twisting things? You've been lying. Don't you get it, Clara? You're mine. You don't need anyone else filling your head with nonsense." "I'm not yours," she whispered. For a moment, the air itself seemed to stop. Ethan's expression flickered. Shock, disbelief, then fury. He grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to leave marks. "Say that again." "Let go," she said, voice trembling. He released her, pacing like a caged animal. "You're ungrateful. Everything I do is for you, for us. And you repay me with betrayal?" Clara's heartbeat thundered. "You call this love, Ethan? You control everything I do. You treat me like property." His face darkened. He moved toward the study, muttering, "You want honesty? Let's be honest." She followed him instinctively, fear tightening her chest. Ethan was rifling through her desk drawers. Papers scattered, pens clattered to the floor. Then he froze, pulling out the small leather-bound notebook. The journal. Clara's breath caught. "Ethan, don't." He flipped it open, eyes scanning the pages. Each line, every secret thought, every quiet cry for freedom. His expression hardened. "So this is what you do when I'm not around. You write lies about me." "They're not lies," she said, stepping forward. "They're my thoughts. Mine." With a single motion, he tore the pages free and threw them into the fireplace. The flame caught quickly, consuming the paper with a hiss. Clara watched helplessly as her words turned to ash, the only proof of her reality burning away. "Now there's nothing left to hide behind," he said. Something inside her cracked. The fear that had kept her quiet for years turned to anger, sharp and clean. "You think you can destroy everything and I'll just keep smiling? You're wrong." Ethan turned, startled by her tone. "Clara!" She slapped him. The sound split the air like thunder. Both of them froze, staring at each other in disbelief. His eyes flickered, rage, shock, something darker, but he didn't strike back. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You'll regret that." Then, just as suddenly, he walked away. Upstairs, a door slammed. Clara stood in the silence that followed, the fire dying down to glowing embers. Her hand shook. The room smelled of smoke and endings. She sank to the floor, knees trembling, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Tears fell, but she didn't wipe them away. For the first time, they weren't from fear. They were from some. She realized she would never be safe here again. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows. The night pressed close against the glass, heavy and waiting. Clara whispered into the emptiness, "It's over." But she knew it wasn't. Not yet. Upstairs, Ethan's footsteps began again, slow and deliberate, and somewhere deep inside her, a decision began to form. The morning after the argument, the air in the house felt different, charged, brittle, like glass waiting to break. Ethan moved around with his usual composure, but his silence had changed. It wasn't anger anymore. It was calculation. Every glance, every wordless pause was a test. Clara knew then that something inside him had shifted, and something inside her had too. When he left for work, she stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the faint burn marks in the fireplace. The ashes of her journal still rested there, dull gray against blackened stone. All her words, gone, but not forgotten. They lived in her now, each line sharpened into resolve. That afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at a notepad. On it, she wrote 3 words in neat handwriting: "Never again alone." Then she drew a single, deliberate line beneath it and folded the page into her apron pocket. In the days that followed, she played her role flawlessly. The perfect wife, the perfect home. She made Ethan's favorite dinners, laughed at his forced jokes, listened to his stories about work. She even apologized for the argument, her voice soft, eyes lowered. Ethan seemed satisfied. His arrogance returned. "You see," he said one night, pouring wine, "we're fine. You just get emotional sometimes." Clara smiled faintly. "You're right. I'm lucky to have you." He kissed her cheek. "You are." Later, when he fell asleep on the couch, she walked to the window and stared into the darkness. Her reflection in the glass looked almost unrecognizable. Alasta, pale, hollow-eyed, yet steady. The idea had come to her quietly over the past few days, growing roots beneath her fear. She didn't think of it as revenge, not at first. It was survival. The next morning, she drove to a home improvement store in the next town over, where no one knew her name. She walked through the aisles, her hands trembling only slightly as she found what she was looking for: a new chest freezer. The salesman smiled politely. "Meal prep, huh? That's a good investment." Clara nodded. "Yes, for the long term." He helped load it into her car, not noticing the distant look in her eyes. When she returned home, she told Ethan about her purchase. "I thought it'd be practical," she said, careful with her tone. "You know how much you love stocking up." He seemed pleased by her initiative. "Smart thinking. You're learning, Clara." That night, after he went to bed, she sat at the kitchen table with her planner. Every step had to be perfect, timed, seamless, unquestionable. She began writing lists: cleaning supplies, heavy-duty gloves, bleach, rope. Each word on the page looked clinical, detached. But inside her, something pulsed: fear, excitement, clarity. For the first time in years, she felt control slipping back into her hands. She researched everything: temperatures, decay, time. Late at night, she watched documentaries under the pretense of can't sleep, studying patterns, learning what not to do. The knowledge steadied her. Planning became its own kind of therapy. One afternoon, she visited Mara again. They sat at the same cafe, steam curling from their cups. "You seem calmer," Mara said, watching her carefully. "I've accepted things," Clara replied, her voice even. "Accepted what?" "That this is my life," Clara said with a small smile, "and I can manage it." Mara frowned. "Clara, that's not acceptance, that's surrender." Clara looked away, her smile fading. "Sometimes they're the same thing." When she returned home, Ethan was outside cleaning the car. He looked up as she pulled into the driveway. "You're out a lot these days." "Errands," she said lightly, "just keeping busy." He nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "Good. I like when you're productive." She walked past him, heart pounding, the sound of the freezer humming faintly in the garage, a new, cold heartbeat under their roof. That night, as she lay beside him, she didn't tremble when he reached for her hand. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts clear, her breathing calm. In her mind, she began counting down, not days or hours, but opportunities. The moment would come. She only needed patience. Outside, winter crept closer, the air sharpening, the nights growing longer. And in the dark of that perfect suburban home, Clara's plan solidified, one chilling, deliberate breath at a time. The first snow of winter fell quietly that evening, dusting the neighborhood in white. Inside the Rivers house, warmth glowed from every corner, the scent of roasted garlic and rosemary filling the air. Clara moved through the kitchen with silent precision, each motion deliberate, almost graceful. On the counter, a bottle of Ethan's favorite wine breathed beside two gleaming glasses. She'd spent the entire day preparing. The table was set with their wedding china, the one they hadn't used in years. A soft melody played from the speaker, one of Ethan's favorite old jazz records. Everything looked perfect. Everything felt wrong. When Ethan came home, he paused in the doorway, surprised. "What's all this?" Clara turned, smiling gently. "Dinner. Just us. No arguments, no tension. I wanted a fresh start." He loosened his scarf, his expression softening. "You're full of surprises lately." "I thought you'd like that." He walked to the table, eyes scanning the dishes, seared steak, mashed potatoes, grilled vegetables. "My favorite," he said, impressed. "I should argue with you more often if this is the result." Clara laughed lightly, the sound practiced. "Let us hope it doesn't come to that." They sat. For a while, the conversation stayed light, safe topics about work, neighbors, the weather. Clara poured the wine, her hands steady. Ethan raised his glass. "To us," he said. "To us," she echoed, clinking gently. They drank. The wine was rich and full, masking the faint bitterness she'd measured so carefully hours before. Ethan cut into his steak, humming approval. "Perfect as always," he said between bites. "You see, Clara, when you let go of all that nonsense, therapy, friends, doubts, you're wonderful, peaceful. This is who you're supposed to be." She smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right." He looked pleased, leaning back in his chair. "I usually am." For a moment, neither spoke. The music drifted softly. The fire crackled in the next room. Clara watched him, the man she'd once loved, the man who'd spent years sculpting her into silence. He was content, blind, utterly certain of his control. Then she noticed it, the subtle falter in his hand as he lifted his glass again. His brow creased. "Stronger than I remember," he murmured. Clara tilted her head. "The wine." He nodded, blinking slowly. "Yeah. Maybe I haven't eaten enough today." She smiled again, her voice soft. "Maybe." Minutes passed. The color drained from his face. His fork clattered against the plate. "Clara," he said, his tone shifting, confusion creeping in. What did you—" He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. The chair tipped back, crashing onto the floor. The music kept playing, calm and steady. Clara didn't move at first. She simply watched him struggle, his breaths shallow, his fingers grasping at the edge of the table. His eyes met hers, wide, terrified, searching for mercy. "Clara," he gasped. "Help me." She rose slowly, her face unreadable. "You always said you wanted control," she whispered. "Now you've—" There was no triumph in her expression, no horror either, just a profound, exhausted stillness. She knelt beside him, brushed the hair from his forehead, and whispered, "It's over." Then, as the last track on the record ended, she stood, collected the plates, and placed them neatly in the sink. The house was peaceful again, eerily so. Through the window, snow continued to fall, covering the world outside in quiet white. Inside, Clara poured herself another glass of wine, staring at the body on the floor. Her reflection in the darkened window looked calm, almost serene. Tomorrow, she thought, she would begin cleaning. The clock read 2:43 a.m. When Clara finally moved. For hours, she'd sat on the kitchen floor beside Ethan's still body, staring into the dark. The fire had gone out long ago. The wine glass lay on its side, a dark stain spreading across the tablecloth like a wound. Her hands trembled as she reached for him. The warmth had already left his skin. For a fleeting moment, she thought she heard his voice, calm, cruel, telling her to clean up her mess. She almost laughed at the thought. Even dead, he found a way to control her. Clara rose slowly, her mind both foggy and razor-sharp. She had planned for this moment, but planning was different from doing. The reality felt heavier, literal and moral. She fetched the thick plastic tarp she'd bought weeks ago for gardening. The irony wasn't lost on her. She wrapped Ethan carefully, her motions mechanical. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whom she was apologizing to, him, herself, or the woman she used to be. The house was silent, but the night wasn't. Outside, the wind hissed softly, brushing against the windows like a warning. Clara dragged the body toward the garage, each movement punctuated by the dull thud of his weight against the tile. Her breath came in gasps, her arms burning. When she reached the door, she paused. The garage smelled faintly of oil and winter air. In the corner stood the new chest freezer, white, gleaming, and innocent-looking. The sales clerk's voice echoed in her head. Energy efficient, large capacity, great for long-term storage. Clara almost smiled. She unlatched the lid and a puff of cold air brushed her face. The inside was empty, silent, waiting. She hesitated, staring into the hollow space that would soon become a tomb. For the briefest second, doubt clawed at her chest. This is wrong. But then images flooded back, his words, his grip on her wrist, the nights she cried herself to sleep under his roof. "No more," she whispered. She lifted his shoulders first, then his legs, inch by inch. The body slid in with a soft, final sound. Clara's breath came out in broken bursts as she positioned him carefully, folding the tarp edges beneath his frame. She looked down at him one last time, the man who had once promised forever. "I hope you find peace," she murmured. Her voice cracked. "Because you never gave me any." The lid came down with a dull thunk. The latch clicked. The hum began, a low, steady vibration that filled the silence, mechanical and cold. Clara stood still, listening. It almost sounded like breathing. She stared at the freezer for a long moment, then walked to the utility sink. Her reflection in the small window above it startled her. Pale skin, glassy eyes, streaks of blood smeared on her cheek. She scrubbed her hands until they turned red, the metallic scent of guilt swirling down the drain. When the first light of dawn touched the sky, she returned to the kitchen. The table was still set from dinner. She quietly gathered the plates, wiped away the stain, and opened the curtains. The world outside was bright and clean, the snow glittering like innocence. Upstairs, she showered, washed her hair, and dressed for work. Emotion felt detached, robotic. She selected her usual beige sweater, the one Ethan said made her look dependable. She applied mascara carefully, hiding the sleepless night. Before leaving, she stopped by the garage one last time. The hum continued, steady and relentless. She placed her hand on the freezer lid, the cold seeping into her fingertips.
"Stay quiet," she whispered. "You always liked silence."
Then she turned off the light and stepped into the daylight. Her neighbor, Mrs. Porter, waved from across the driveway. "Morning, Clara. You're up early." Clara smiled, a perfect, practiced smile.
"Big day at work,"
she said lightly.
"Couldn't sleep."
She drove away, the house shrinking in her rearview mirror. Behind her in the dark garage, the freezer kept humming, steady, rhythmic, alive in its own way. 6 months passed, and no one suspected a thing. The Rivers house, once filled with shouting and slammed doors, now breathed serenity. Clara had painted the living room a warm cream, replacing Ethan's dark leather furniture with soft linen and sunlight. She filled the rooms with flowers, the scent of lilac masking any memory that lingered beneath the floorboards. To everyone around her, she was thriving. The neighbors called her strong. Her colleagues said she looked lighter, and maybe she did. Each day began with coffee by the window, silence humming gently through the walls. Only she knew that the true heartbeat of her home came from the garage. The low, constant murmur of the freezer had become her lullaby. She built routines, the kind Ethan would have mocked. Morning walks, evening wine, a new book club at the local library, where she laughed easily and contributed sharp opinions on crime novels. When someone asked about Ethan, she smiled with convincing warmth.
"He's consulting overseas. 6 months in Dubai, maybe longer. He loves the work."
Her tone was perfect. Not defensive, not distant, just a proud wife waiting for her husband to come home. But Mara saw through it. They met every Friday afternoon for coffee, same cafe, same tea, blee. At first, Clara spoke about home renovations and work gossip. She even joked that Ethan had finally learned how to cook. Mara had smiled politely but watched the subtle tells, the way Clara's hands fidgeted when she lied, how her smile held too long, too still. By spring, Mara couldn't ignore it anymore.
"You seem peaceful,"
she said one afternoon, studying her friend's face. Clara sipped her cappuccino, avoiding her eyes.
"Isn't that a good thing?"
"Maybe," Mara said softly, "but peace usually comes with rest. You look like someone who hasn't truly slept in months." Clara froze for a moment, her spoon hovering above the cup.
"You're reading too much into it,"
she said, her voice calm but distant.
"I'm fine. I just needed space. Ethan needed it too."
Mara tilted her head.
"He hasn't called? Not once?"
Clara's lips curved.
"Time zones," she replied too quickly. "And he's busy. We text sometimes."
Mara nodded slowly, though she didn't believe a word. There was something strange in Clara's eyes. Not grief, not guilt exactly, but something quieter. Final. Later that night, Clara sat in bed, phone in hand, staring at old photos of her and Ethan. Each image felt foreign, as though she were looking at strangers. She deleted them one by one. When the last photo vanished, she whispered,
"You're gone for good."
The next morning, she hosted brunch for neighbors. The women complimented her decor, her calm, her newfound energy. Clara smiled, poured mimosas, and made jokes about married life. Beneath the laughter, she could hear it faintly, the steady hum beneath her feet. After everyone left, she wandered into the garage. The air was cool and still. She approached the freezer, placing her palm flat against the lid.
"Still quiet," she murmured.
"Good." Her reflection in the polished surface looked strange, too composed, almost unfeeling. For the first time, the hum did. It sounded comforting. It sounded accusatory. That night, she dreamt of Ethan. In the dream, he stood beside the freezer, whispering, "You didn't bury me deep enough." She woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding against the silence. By morning, she looked normal again, calm, radiant even. She dressed in soft colors and went to work. But Mara wasn't done asking questions. She'd begun noticing inconsistencies in Clara's story. Dates that didn't align, messages that sounded copied. She'd even thought about calling Ethan's old office. And soon she would. It began with an email that never got a reply. Ethan's co-worker, Daniel Ward, had grown uneasy after months of silence. Ethan wasn't the type to disappear, not without boasting about it. At first, Daniel assumed the consulting trip had gone long. But when payroll flagged Ethan's inactivity and his phone number bounced to voicemail, concern hardened into suspicion. On a gray Monday morning, Daniel walked into the local police station and said the words that would shatter Clara's illusion of peace. "I'd like to file a missing person report. Ethan Rivers, my colleague." Detective Reed, a seasoned officer with a calm, deliberate voice, took the statement. His partner, Detective Holloway, young, sharp-eyed, typed quietly, noting every word. Within hours, Ethan's name appeared in the department database. A search began. 2 days later, they knocked on Clara's door. She'd just finished watering her indoor plants when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, she saw 2 silhouettes, badges glinting faintly. Her hand tightened around the watering can before she forced herself to smile. "Mrs. Rivers?" Reed asked politely when she opened the door. "Yes," she replied, voice steady. "Can I help you?" "I'm Detective Reed. This is Detective Holloway. We're following up on a report filed by one of your husband's colleagues. It seems no one's heard from Ethan in quite some time." Clara blinked, feigning surprise. "Oh, I told Daniel. Ethan's been traveling. Dubai, then maybe Singapore. Consulting work." "Do you have any proof of that? Flight records, messages, anything recent?" Reed's tone was gentle, almost apologetic. Clara hesitated. "We don't talk much while he's away. Different time zones, bad connections." Holloway tilted his head. 6 months without a single call? That's unusual, ma'am." She laughed lightly, though her throat felt tight. "Ethan's always been unpredictable. He disappears into projects. It's kind of his thing." Reed handed her his card. "If you hear from him, please contact us. We're not assuming the worst, just doing our due diligence." Clara nodded, taking the card with trembling fingers. "Of course." As they walked back to their car, Holloway whispered, "She's too calm." Reed glanced back at the house. "Or too scared. Either way, keep an eye on her." Inside, Clara collapsed against the door, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Her heart thundered so loudly she thought the detectives might hear it from the driveway. She clutched the card, staring at the bold black print. Detective Nathan Reed. It felt like a countdown had just started. That night, she barely slept. She replayed every word, every glance. Do they know? Did I hesitate too long? By morning, she'd rebuilt her composure. She practiced her smile in the mirror, ironed her clothes, and decided to visit Mara, if only to feel normal. But when she arrived at the cafe, Mara's expression was guarded. "I heard from Daniel," Mara said softly. "He said the police are looking for Ethan." Clara's pulse spiked. "They're just being thorough," she replied too quickly. "It's a misunderstanding." Mara studied her carefully. "Clara, is there something you haven't told me?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For a moment, she wanted to confess everything, the freezer, the silence, the unbearable nights. But then she saw the reflection of herself in the cafe window. Calm, clean, in control. The mask was too heavy to remove now. "No," she whispered. "There's nothing to tell." When she returned home that evening, she stood in the garage again. The freezer hummed softly. She placed her hand on the lid.
"They're looking for you," she murmured, "but you're not going anywhere."
The sound of the hum grew louder, almost mocking. From the kitchen, she thought she heard a faint knock. She froze. Another visit. Another question. Another chip in her perfect story. It started with a flicker of lights. On a humid June morning, Clara noticed the kitchen bulbs dimming every few seconds. The hum from the garage, usually steady and soothing, had begun to waver. She told herself it was nothing, just old wiring. But by noon, the power tripped entirely. She called a maintenance company, masking her nerves with cheerful small talk.
"It's probably the fuse box," she said lightly. "My husband usually takes care of these things, but he's away."
The technician arrived before evening, middle-aged, chatty, the kind of man who whistled while he worked. Clara followed him into the garage, her pulse quickening with every step. The air felt heavy, thick. He crouched near the wall, prying open the fuse box. "Looks like a short circuit," he muttered. Then he sniffed the air, frowning. "You smell that?" Clara froze.
"Smell what?"
He straightened, nose wrinkling. "Something's off. Like spoiled meat or maybe a dead animal. Could be something crawled behind a wall. Happens more than you'd think." Clara forced a laugh, though her throat went dry.
"Maybe something in the trash bins."
The man nodded uncertainly but kept glancing around. His eyes landed on the freezer in the corner. "That new?" "Yes," Clara replied too quickly. "Got it months ago. I store meat. Bulk shopping." "Mind if I check behind it? Sometimes wires melt, causes smells." Her breath caught. "No, that's, unnecessary. It's fine." But he was already stepping closer, curiosity outweighing courtesy. He knelt beside the freezer, sniffed again, and grimaced. "Ma'am, I'm sorted. Awry, but something's definitely wrong here. You should have someone inspect it." Clara's smile faltered. "I'll handle it," she said sharply. The man hesitated, then nodded, backing away. But his eyes lingered on her too long, reading the tension she tried to hide. He finished the repairs quickly, mumbling something about reporting a possible safety hazard to the homeowners association. The moment he left, Clara locked the garage door and leaned against it, her chest tightening. The hum was weaker now, uneven. Panic crept through her veins like ice. That night, she barely moved from her chair by the window. Every sound outside made her flinch. The crunch of gravel, the bark of a dog, the distant wail of a siren. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Mara. "Are you okay? Heard something happened at your house today." Clara didn't reply. The next morning, 2 police cars pulled into her driveway. Detective Reed stepped out first, his face grim. "Mrs. Rivers," he said calmly, "we've received a report of a possible biohazard or decomposing material on your property. We have a warrant to inspect the premises." Clara's world tilted.
"A warrant?"
she whispered.
"For what?"
Reed's expression softened, almost pitying. "Just procedure." Behind him, Holloway and 2 officers approached the garage. She wanted to run, to scream, to wake from this slow-motion nightmare, but her feet wouldn't move. The officers opened the door. The smell hit instantly, sickly sweet, undeniable. Holloway gagged softly, covering his mouth. Reed stepped forward, eyes narrowing as he looked toward the freezer. "Open it," he said quietly. The latch lifted with a hollow click. Clara couldn't look, but she didn't need to. The silence that followed was enough, the kind of silence that ends everything. Reed's voice came low, almost a whisper. "Call the coroner." Clara's knees gave out. As the hum finally topped, so did the illusion of peace. The interrogation room was cold, too cold. A single bulb buzzed overhead, its light washing Clara's pale face in a colorless glow. Her wrists trembled slightly as she wrapped her fingers around a cup of untouched water. Detective Reed sat across from her, calm, expression unreadable. His partner Holloway leaned against the wall, arms folded. For hours, they'd asked questions: where, when, how. But now they waited in silence. They wanted why. Clara stared at the table, her reflection blurred by tears she refused to let fall. The hum in her ears wouldn't stop. It reminded her of the freezer, that constant mechanical heartbeat. Reed's voice was low, almost gentle. "Mrs. Rivers, we found him. We found your husband." She didn't flinch. "There's evidence you planned this," he continued. "The purchase of the freezer, the poison traces. You could help yourself if you told us the truth." Clara finally looked up, eyes hollow but steady. "The truth?" she repeated softly. "You wouldn't believe it. Try me," Reed said. She exhaled, the sound shaky, fragile. "For years I thought I was crazy. Ethan made sure of it. He told me what to wear, what to say, when to smile. If I didn't, he'd remind me who I belonged to." Her gaze drifted to the wall, as though she could see those memories playing out there. "He never hit me where it showed, but he left bruises just the same. Words can rot you from the inside out, Detective. I used to apologize when I cried. I used to ask permission to breathe." Holloway shifted uncomfortably, but Reed stayed still. "One night," she continued, "he found my journal, called it my book of lies. He tore it up page by page. I tried to stop him and he—" Her voice cracked. "He threw me against the counter. I remember the sound of the glass breaking, the way he smiled afterward." Her fingers clenched the edge of the table. "Something inside me broke, too. That's the night I stopped being afraid." Reed's tone softened. "So you decided to kill him?" Clara nodded faintly. "I decided to survive." The words hung heavy between them. "I cooked his favorite dinner," she whispered. "He thought I was trying to make peace. He drank the wine, told me I was finally being the wife he wanted. When he fell, I felt calm. Not joy, just calm. For the first time, there was silence. Tears slid down her face, slow and quiet. I didn't bury him to hide. I buried him to keep the silence alive." Reed leaned forward. "You know this won't look like self-defense." She met his eyes, her expression eerily serene. "I know. But you asked for the truth." For a long moment, no one spoke. Reed studied her face, the mix of exhaustion and strange peace. Finally, he stood. "We'll have to process you for booking." Clara nodded, whispering, "It's all right. I've already been imprisoned once." As Holloway opened the door, Reed hesitated, looking back at her. "You said you stopped being afraid that night. Are you afraid now?" She smiled faintly. "No, Detective. Fear died before he did." Reed said nothing. As he left, a single thought lingered in his mind. Was she the killer, or just another casualty of control?